Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we are on location in beautiful Petaluma, California. And why we're in Petaluma is that's where my buddy Aaron lives. And what we're going to be showing you how to do today is replace a brake booster on his FZJ80. The reason why we're replacing it is because Aaron discovered that the brake pedal got really hard. And when the brake pedal gets really hard and stiff, that's a dead giveaway that your brake booster has gone bad, because the vacuum assist of the brake booster makes the pedal much more soft and supple, and you can stop your vehicle easily by applying pressure to the brake pedal. When it gets really hard and firm, that lets you know that something is up. You either lost vacuum because the vacuum hose leading from the intake manifold to the brake booster maybe got a crack in it or broke all the way and you're not getting the vacuum, or the check valve on the brake booster has gone bad and it's not allowing you to pull a vacuum on the brake booster, or the internals of the brake booster itself had failed, and that's what we suspect happened to Aaron's brake booster. The internals of the brake booster failed and it's not holding a vacuum and giving that assist to make the brake pedal operate properly. You obviously have choices of where you buy the brake booster from. One obvious choice is straight from Toyota. Either you buy it from a local dealership or you go online and you buy it from a Toyota part seller. What Aaron did is he bought this from a place called the Cruiser Yard, and it's basically the same as an OEM because it's made by Bosch, which makes the OEM brake boosters, and he was able to get this for a much more affordable price than buying it from a Toyota dealer or an online Toyota part seller. We'll put a link in the video description to the one he purchased for his FZJ80 rig. Aaron has a factory service manual for this rig, and when you read the instructions on the proper steps to replacing the brake booster, they say one of the first things you do is you disconnect the fluid lines to the brake master cylinder, then you remove the nuts that hold the brake master cylinder to the brake booster, and you get it out of the way. What we found is that you don't have to do that. There's write-ups on this subject, and there's also a guy that did a pretty good video of his own on his YouTube channel called Otram, and his video is pretty informative, but the one thing that wasn't so great about his video was he was filming by himself and he had to rely on a tripod with the camera in one position, and for a lot of the video he's shooting from this direction and his arm and his body is in the way of what's going on. So the reason why Aaron and I decided we were going to make this video, even though there's a pretty good video in existence, is we're hoping to show you, the viewer, a little bit more detail than Otram was able to do with this stationary camera location. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to show you how you can test your brake booster. This comes straight out of the Toyota factory service manual. We'll show you a couple simple steps to let you know, yes, the brake booster is working properly, or no, it's not, and it's time to do something about it. Let's get started with the first test. The first test we're going to show is with the engine off. When you have a properly working brake booster, that there is some residual vacuum in that brake booster, when you depress the brake pedal, it should go down the furthest on the first push, and then when you push it again, the pedal should travel up a little bit because you've lost a little vacuum assist. And then you press it a third time, and again the pedal should rise. And then after that third press, seeing that the pedal incrementally rose on you, showing that it's working properly, then you keep your foot on the brake with the pedal kind of in a high position, and then when you start the engine with a vacuum now being pulled on the brake booster, you should feel the pedal slowly settle down and then stop, and that's letting you know the brake booster is working. For this first test, because Aaron's FJ80 brake booster is bad, we won't be able to show a properly working brake booster on his rig, so we're doing this test on my 2000 4Runner, which would basically be the same procedure. So I'm going to press it down once, it travels down so far. I'm going to let go and press it again. I could totally feel that the pedal rose a little bit. I'm going to press it again, and I could tell again that it rose again for that third time. Now with pressure still on the pedal, I'm going to start it up, and you should see my foot travel down with the brake pedal a little bit and settle. And that's because the brake booster is now giving some assist. And so you saw how my foot traveled down. It settled down to its normal position with the brake booster operating properly. So now I'm sitting in the driver's seat of Aaron's FZJ80, and we're going to do the same test. We already know what's going to fail, but we want to show you the visual of what's happening with the pedal. The pedal position isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to stay in one position and not go down to a far level, then a little bit higher, then a little bit higher. It's just going to stay in the same position because there's no residual vacuum in that brake booster because that's not holding a vacuum. I press it once, it goes down to that position. Same position, nothing, okay? Now I'm going to start it. And still you'll see that the pedal didn't sink like it did on my 2004 and go down to where it normally would be sitting when the brake booster is operating properly. So Aaron's FZJ80 failed the brake booster test. For the brake booster to work properly, it has to be getting vacuum from the engine. So like I said, it's getting it from the intake manifold. This rubber hose right here is attached to a nipple on the intake manifold. It wraps around in kind of a J shape, and then it hooks up to this nipple on the brake booster, and there should be a check valve in there. Going from the easiest possible fix to the more involved fix, you first want to make sure your vacuum hose is intact, because if it's got a major crack in it or it's severed all the way by some means, then you're not going to be pulling a vacuum on the brake booster and it's not going to work properly. So first we're going to check the integrity of the vacuum hose leading from the intake manifold to the booster. So you're going to want to look at it all the way from the intake manifold towards the booster, and this hose feels pretty supple still. I don't see any damage to it, so I would have to say that this hose is still in good shape and it's able to pull a vacuum. The other thing you want to make sure is that, is the intake manifold pulling a vacuum through that hose? I think it's probably a pretty rare occasion that some obstruction inside the intake manifold could cause the vacuum not to work, but we're going to check it anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the constant tension clamp that attaches the vacuum hose to the brake booster check valve nipple, and then I'm going to have Aaron start the engine, and I should be able to put my thumb or finger over the vacuum hose and it should be sucking it in, letting me know that there is a vacuum being pulled from the intake manifold. So I'm going to get a bent nose needle nose pliers and remove that constant tension clamp. Okay, I've got the constant tension clamp slid back. I'm going to see if I could just twist this off. It's coming off. Okay, I'm going to have Aaron start the engine now, and we'll see if there's a suction being applied to that hose. So Aaron's starting the engine. And I could feel it. It's sucking the glove into the hose. So we definitely have a vacuum being pulled from the intake manifold. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the 4 nuts that hold the brake master cylinder to the brake booster, and we're going to pull it back a little bit. And what I want to see is, once I get the master cylinder pulled back a little bit and this little bracket out of the way, I want to see if I can pull this check valve out of the brake booster. It appears to me that it just sticks in there with a rubber grommet based off friction, just like a PVC valve goes into a rubber grommet into one of the valve covers. That's what I'm thinking. So we're going to experiment on this one and not the new one and possibly break the new one. This is territory that we haven't done yet. We're kind of learning here. So I want to see if I could just pull that valve out, and I should be able to put the nipple on my lips, suck, and air should freely flow out. But when I blow on it, it shouldn't allow air to go out, positive pressure, but I should be able to suck air through it if the check valve is working properly. So I just wanted to see if maybe it's just the check valve that's not working properly on this brake booster, and maybe the internals of the brake booster are still good. I just wanted to do that one check before we go ahead and throw this brake booster away. The brake master cylinder is held onto the brake booster by 4 12mm nuts. What I'm going to do to zip them out is I'm going to use my long reach Milwaukee ratchet, 3/8 drive, and then I'm going to use a long wobble extension. A wobble extension is so there's a little bit of movement. It's like somewhere in between a regular extension that offers no movement and a swivel. So it offers just enough movement to where if you can't get a straight shot at the fastener, it will give you a little bit of angle so you can. Well, this is probably like about a 12 incher. I usually tell my girlfriend that's 12 inches, but this is actually about is that 12 inches? I think that's 12 inches. I don't know.
I think it looks like 14 to me.
I'm not a porn star, so I don't know.
It looks like 14.
Here's the brake master cylinder. Here's the brake booster. One of the 4 nuts is right here. Then right below it, there's another one. And then on the side that's facing the engine, you have another one right here. And then you got another one below, right there. Before we start attacking the 4 nuts, we're going to disconnect this sensor wire. This is the sensor that would tell you if your brake fluid was low. So we're going to just squeeze the tab right here and pull it out. Okay, now that's out of our way. And now Aaron is going to use the ratchet extension and 12mm socket to get the nuts out. We've got the 2 off on the driver's side of the master cylinder. Now Aaron's going to work on the 2 that are on the passenger side, in between the master cylinder and the engine. Okay, one more to go, that bottom left one. We now got all 4 nuts off that attach the master cylinder to the brake booster. There's this like teardrop bracket that slips over the upper right stud and then slides onto the check valve nipple on the brake booster. We're going to slide that off. So that's what it looks like. We're just going to set that aside. And then we want to pull the master cylinder back this way towards the front of the vehicle. And there is a bracket behind here that we have to keep track of too. So Aaron's going to pull backwards on this, and then you just have to be careful and kind of gentle. The brake lines will bend a little bit because they are fairly malleable. So just be kind of gentle, pull it back just far enough to where you think you have enough room to sneak the brake booster out. This metal bracket right here that sits behind the master cylinder, it's got the throttle cable clipped into it in 2 spots. One spot is right here, right under the front of the master cylinder, and then there's another spot back kind of underneath the intake manifold. So you want to disconnect the throttle cable from those 2 clips, which Aaron is going to do now. It's hard to show up because it's hard to get the camera in there.
There we go, it's free.
Okay, so now the throttle cable is free of that bracket. So now Aaron's going to pull back on the master cylinder and being mindful of the lines, and we're going to see how far we can get this back before we start worrying about tweaking lines too much. How are the lines looking, Aaron?
I think they look fine. They're bending. I feel like this bracket needs to come off separately.
The bracket we're trying to remove right now was holding that throttle cable. So it's not the one in the front, it's the one in the back. So this bracket travels underneath the brake master cylinder, and it's part of this assembly. You have to pull the master cylinder off the studs, and then once you got the inner bracket off the studs also, then you could wiggle it out. And Aaron's gonna get that out, and I'm gonna try to capture it as best I can with the camera.
Obviously being careful. They seem married. I know they're not. This is completely out. And I don't know that this bracket wants to come out.
It should come out. No? You want me to take a look at it?
Maybe. It's all a breaking thing.
You're getting it.
Yes.
There it is. There's the bracket. It sits like that, and that's where the back end of the throttle cable connected to and through that little hook there. Did we have to remove that bracket? We think we did, because it's going to help give us a little more room to get the brake booster out. Now I want to see if I can pull the check valve out. It's the fitting right here. So if my theory is correct, I'll be able to pull it out. I'm going to start with a decent sized flat blade screwdriver, get in between the fitting and the grommet, twist out a little bit to get a little bit of space. Now that I got a little bit of space, I'm going to move to a pry bar that has a little bit more mechanical advantage, and I could pry a little further with, and I'll see if I can pry this out of the grommet. There it is. I can feel it coming out. And I was right. It just plugs in with the grommet. So here it is. You can see like there's like a little valve in there. I'm going to be sucking on a dirty nipple. With the way it should work is you should be able to suck air through it, but you can't blow air through it. Yep, I can pull air through. And then if I blow positive pressure through it, it should stop it. Yeah, I can't blow through it. So this check valve is good on the brake booster. So the problem is not with the check valve. It's somewhere internal in the diaphragms in that brake booster that aren't working properly, holding the vacuum necessary to give the assist that you need to make the brake pedal feel nice and supple and work better. So now the next step is we have to get under the dash, which is kind of uncomfortable. If you have a bad back, maybe get someone to help you that has a good back, because you're going to have to be twisting and you're going to need a flashlight and you got to get underneath the dash, and we're going to do our best to capture that footage for you while we're under the dash, removing the nuts that hold the brake booster to the body. And then we have to disconnect the return spring for the brake pedal, and then we have to remove a clip and a little rod to free the brake booster plunger from the brake pedal itself. So let's go underneath the dash now. So I'm laying on my back, I'm going underneath the dash. Here's the steering shaft right here, and then on each side there's going to be two nuts, and they're 12 millimeter. So those are the two on the passenger side of the brake booster. And then if I go to the other side, you'll see the other two. There's one on the bottom and there's one on the top. And you might have to use a swivel. We're going to try to use the same setup with a Wobble extension, 12 millimeter socket, and we're going to use my Milwaukee Ratchet to zip them out. Before we attack the nuts, we're going to disconnect the return spring. You just got to pull it basically kind of towards the floor and then let it go. And don't let it go with a lot of force. You want to be able to maintain where it's hooked on the other side. And then there's the retaining clip right here. And I'm going to grab a hold of that and pull out. And so now we got the retaining clip out. Then I could slide the rod through and free the plunger of the brake booster from the brake pedal. The lighting's not perfect, but we're doing the best we can. I'm going to slide the rod through and pull it out the other side. And then now you can see that the pedal's free of the plunger. Okay. Here's the two pieces that we removed that hold the brake booster plunger to the brake pedal. You have the clip, and then you have the rod. And then right at the end of the rod, you see the little indentation where the hooked part of the spring connects to. For this job, I would suggest a headlamp, unless you got a good shop light that you can get underneath there. That won't get in your way, but will give you enough light to see what you're doing. I like using a headlamp, so we're not going to try to get the camera in there at the same time, because it's just too damn hard for me to get underneath there with the tools and for Aaron to get in there with the camera. So again, we're going to use the Wobble extension about a foot. We're going to use a swivel. This happens to be an impact swivel, but you can just use a regular swivel. And then we're using a short 12 millimeter socket. And I just test fitted it, and I can get on all of them. So again, I'm going to use the Milwaukee Ratchet to zip them out. There's one. So there's all 4 12mm nuts out. So now probably the most difficult part, because we're choosing to cheat and not remove the master cylinder and get it out of our way, is we're going to have to sneak this thing out. We've got this one brake line that attaches to a bracket up on the firewall. We're going to remove that to get a little more articulation out of this. But what I think we're going to do is I'm going to pull back on this master cylinder while filming, doing double duty, and then I'm going to let Aaron work it out to where he can get this booster out probably this direction right through here. So he's first going to remove that brake line from the bracket on the firewall. Okay, that gave a little bit more movement, huh?
A little. Okay,
so I'm going to pull back on the brake master cylinder and see if you can finagle that thing out. It's hung up on the studs, huh? Okay, it's more free.
Way more.
How are these brake lines looking? We've got it free, and it wasn't exactly easy. It took a little bit of trial and error, and we apologize for not showing it, but we are working at it together, and then we finally figured out how to do it. First, we pulled the master cylinder back far enough to where we can hook this tab of the master cylinder up against the intake manifold, and it holds it there. And then this side of the brake booster, when you're pulling it out, wants to hang up on this part of the intake manifold. So you just got to pull with enough force to sneak the brake booster out this way towards the passenger side, and then you can get it out. So now that's where we're at. It looks like it's almost out. Now we got to figure out how to get it out the rest of the way. We got this brake line in our way. I'm going to tilt it up towards the top here. Okay, it's coming out a little further.
It's hanging up on the inside.
There we go.
Money.
Oh, don't put it back in there. Was it worth to keep the master cylinder in and not have to bleed the master cylinder and the brakes afterwards? I think it's probably worth it. But it's also a fight. Even with the master cylinder pulled back pretty far, you're fighting getting it by the intake manifold. And then once you get that, you still got to tweak the brake lines a little bit on this ABS module in order for it to clear. So this one right here got in the way a little bit. But now we finally got it free, and we have to get the new one in. So here's the brake booster out. You can see part of the gasket that seals it to the firewall is just kind of laying here. The other half is, I think, against the firewall or dropped down somewhere. You've got this fork end that attaches to the rod of the brake booster, and then it's held at its adjustment with a set nut. So we want to get this onto the new one in the same spot. So how are we going to do that? We're going to count the threads. If I start by counting at the first full thread and count up, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and it looks like the end of this flange nut is equal to about the 10th thread. So now we can undo this and take this forked end off and get it back on and know that we're pretty much getting it back in the same position. The way we're going to remove this is I'm going to hold the bracket steady with a flat blade screwdriver going through the 2 holes, and then Aaron's going to work an open end 14mm and loosen it. There, it's loose.
Well, that was easy.
Okay, now you should be able to spin that off now at the end. There we go. Okay, and then we take the nut off. And then we'll transfer it over to the new one. And then we're going to get the top of that flange nut equal to the 10th thread. Aaron got it to the 10th thread. I'm just now going to be a second set of eyes and confirm. So 1, 2, 9, 10. Yep, he got it right. Now that we have the nut in the right place, I'm going to spin the forked end down to the nut. Okay, and then we're going to use the screwdriver and the 14mm box end wrench, and I'm just going to back these two together and lock them in place. How tight? Good and tight. And that's good and tight.
Oh, it is.
So now we're going to get the new gasket that goes in between the firewall and the brake booster on. Can it only go on one way? It's pretty much, yeah, I think you could probably turn it upside down. It doesn't really matter, huh?
No.
It's not shaped a certain way. Okay.
Oh, wait.
Is it?
Is that just...
No,
maybe,
it looks like it does. It looks like it does. Oh, yeah, it's offset. It is offset. The circle's offset. So it can only go on one way. You got lucky the first time.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, you can see that the hole is offset to one side, and it does really only go on one way. So now the hard part is we got to fit this sucker back in there and deal with the brake lines in our way. Oh, remember that thing was facing that way. So just remember the orientation. That check valve was pointing towards the fender.
Pretty much just having that there.
Yeah, and you have the writing on here to where you can read it. And let me pull on this line a little bit for you.
I'll tell you what, it looks like it's...
You're not finding the hole, Aaron. You're not finding the hole. I thought you were good at finding the hole. You got to pick it up a little bit. Come on, Aaron, find the hole. There he is. You got in the hole. You got in the hole. Well, that was a hell of a lot easier. Now you got to clear. You already clear the intake manifold?
Not quite.
Okay, you got to push past the intake manifold. Okay, we're going to fight this for a little bit. I just played around with trying to get this in, and I figured out, I think, the best way to do it. So on the driver's side, you get the two studs started. So I'm going to get the bottom one lined up and the top one lined up. And now that those two are lined up with the hole, if I push in, I can get the other ones in. There it is. So I think that's the best way to go, guys and gals, if you're working on your FJ80, if you're a cool gal that wrenches. Get the two studs, top and bottom, on the driver's side. Get them lined up with the hole, start pushing them in, and then rotate the other two studs through the firewall and squeeze it past the intake manifold. That seemed to work pretty darn good. The next part seems to be a two-person operation because the brake booster wants to kind of fall out of the firewall. What we're going to do is I'm going to have Aaron pushing on the brake booster while I'm under the dash getting these 4 nuts started. We're not going to film it, but we just suggest you get someone to help you out pushing the brake booster up against the firewall so the studs are sticking through the firewall enough to where you can get all 4 of these started. I've got 3 of the nuts started, but the upper left one doesn't allow me enough to get my fingers in there to get it started. So what I'm going to do is use that trick that I use quite a bit, is I'm going to put a piece of electrical tape over the socket. I'm going to force the nut onto there to now it won't come free, and then I could feed this up in there and get the nuts started. For those 4 nuts that attach the brake booster to the firewall, I use the same tools, the Wobble extension, a swivel, and then the 12mm socket. What I did to make the tightening a little easier is I first did most of the tightening with my little shorty ratchet because it's a little easier to get in there, and then to do the final tightening to where I felt they're going to be tight enough and they won't come loose, I use my longer flex head ratchet. The torque spec for those nuts is 13 foot-pounds, but because you can't get a straight shot at the fastener, a torque wrench is not going to give you an accurate reading. So just use your best judgment and get them tight enough to where they're not going to come loose. But don't strip the frickin' nuts. Don't go crazy. Don't use a big long ratchet with a lot of leverage. Choke up on a 3/8 ratchet like this, get them snug, call it good. Now that we got the brake booster attached correctly to the firewall, we're going to get the gasket onto the brake booster that goes in between the master cylinder and the brake booster. And then now we've got to unhook the brake master cylinder where it's kind of resting against the intake manifold and slide it over the studs. While we're getting the brake master cylinder in place, we got to remember to get that bracket that we took off at the beginning. That sucker right there, and it points this direction because the throttle cable connects underneath like that. So this is the orientation it goes in. And we're gonna see how Aaron does with getting this damn thing back in.
Do this one first.
So that's unhooked.
It's almost like the brake line's got new memory.
Yeah.
Wow.
You'll get it.
There's 2. Actually, this should go back in here, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Was it on top?
Yeah. The top one. Okay. He's just manipulating the master cylinder, getting the brake lines kind of tweaked back to where they were.
Right. There we go. It's hanging. I would say it must be hanging up on something because it doesn't feel. It feels like it's really fighting me.
There it is. You got them lined up. Okay. Now you got to figure out how to get that bracket in.
Goes like that. Was it really that easy?
No, I don't know.
Yes, it was. Oh my goodness.
You got it that easy?
Yep. Well, master cylinder's not on, but the bracket's in there.
Okay. You got the nuts? Where are the nuts at? Here, I'll hold this. You grab the nuts. We've got the master cylinder sort of on all 4 studs, but not fully in. We're going to go ahead and just get the nuts started on the upper right one first that has that little teardrop bracket that basically goes from the upper right stud to the check valve. Get that slid over. Okay, get that nut started.
Without dropping it.
Don't drop your nuts. Wait till you get much older for your nuts to drop. Okay, we've got the upper right one started. Which one are we going to go for next? Top left?
Yep. We're on.
Okay. From the tweaking we did of the lines pulling the master cylinder out, this bottom bracket is actually not part of the master cylinder. So it took a little bit of force. So what Aaron did, while I was trying to get the nut on, he applied some force with the pry bar and pushed the bracket in place over the stud. And then I was able to get the nut started. So you might have to do something like that, or you just do it yourself with one hand holding a pry bar or a big screwdriver and the other is getting the nut started. So now we got 3 of them started, and now we just got to get the one on the bottom left started. It's a little tough to get in here. If you got big meat hooks, maybe you're not going to have such an easy time. We've got all 12mm nuts started. Now we're going to tighten them down. This one we might be able to get in there with a torque wrench fairly straight, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to use that German spec, a Guden type. All you have to know if you're really worried about it, it's 13 foot-pounds. So if you really want to torque it to spec, 13 foot-pounds is the spec for the master cylinder connection to the brake booster and the brake booster to the firewall. I'm going to slowly tighten these things up evenly. Don't go too crazy on any of them just yet. Okay, that upper left one is good and tight. Bottom right is good and tight. Upper right is good and tight. And finally the bottom left. Okay, they're all tight. Now that we got the brake master cylinder properly fastened to the brake booster, we're going to go back up underneath the dash. We got to attach the brake booster plunger to the brake pedal with that little rod and clip, and then we got to hook up the return spring, and then we should be good to go. So I slid the rod in from the center of the vehicle towards the driver's side. I slipped in the clip through the hole, and then I grabbed the hold of the end of the spring with my needle nose pliers, and I stretched it and I hooked it over the end of that rod. I wish we can show it, but it's just going to be too freaking hard to get in there to show you the necessary detail. But I'm pretty sure you could figure it out. Woo. Now we just got to connect up the vacuum hose and start this thing and verify that the brake booster is working like it should. So I'm going to slip off the little protective blue nipple that was on there. So slide that sucker on. Okay, that's on all the way. Get my bent nose needle nose pliers and get the constant tension clamp in place. Okay, that's on. Do a last check to make sure we're not forgetting anything. So we didn't disconnect any brake lines. That's not a problem. We got the vacuum hose connected. We got the brake master cylinder properly connected to the brake booster with the new gasket in between the two. We've got the brake booster connected to the firewall properly with the 4 12mm nuts with the fresh gasket. We should be good to go. Now we're just going to do a once over, make sure we don't leave any tools on top of the rig. No beers on top of the rig. Now we're going to start it, and when Aaron starts it, he should see that the brake pedal settles like we did see when we started my 2004 Runner. The pedal is pretty high right now, so he should be able to put pressure on it, start it, and it should settle in. So he's got pressure on the pedal, and we should see it settle in.
Yeah, right now it's not moving at all.
Yeah, that's settled in, huh? So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna perform the same test that we did at the very beginning. We're gonna let it build up a little bit of vacuum, and we're gonna shut it down, and then we're gonna do the pedal test where he's gonna push it once. It should go down to its furthest most point. He's gonna push it again, it should rise a little bit. He's gonna push it a third time and it should rise again. And then when we start it, it should again sink down to that normal position. So we're gonna let it run for about 2 minutes. We ran it for at least 2 minutes, and now we're gonna do the pedal test. We should see it go down pretty far in the first one, and then the second and third one, the pedal should rise a little bit. Go ahead, Aaron. Okay, 1, 2, it did rise,
Oh, yeah,
I see
absolutely.
that. 3.
Yeah.
Okay, now press it again and hold it and turn the key on. Let's just determine that the pedal does settle after you turn it on. Yep, it's going down and it's settled, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, it's good.
Working brake booster.
After you've done the pedal test, it's good practice before, especially you go freeway speeds or down a big mountain pass. Go ahead and take a test drive through some residential streets, preferably not where a bunch of little kids are running, and just make sure that the brakes are working properly. Do a few brake checks when you're going at a nice, comfortably and safe speed, like 20 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour. Okay, Aaron.
See you guys in a bit.
Okay. All right, we are all done with this job. Aaron and I just showed you how to replace a brake booster on an FJ80, or very specifically an FZJ80, because I know those Land Cruiser folks get all worked up in their panties in a wad when I don't say it right. So FZJ80. It's not a really hard job. It was a little hard getting the brake booster out because it kind of rubs up against the intake manifold, but we showed you the proper orientation. You kind of work it out towards the driver's side, and the same way going back in. You get the right 2 studs into the holes first, and then you wiggle it in through the firewall. The under dash stuff isn't so comfortable because you're on your back, and like I said, we recommend you use a headlamp so you can see what you're doing much easier. But other than that, it's a pretty darn easy job to do, and we did prove, just like that O-Tram YouTube guy did ahead of us, you can do this without disconnecting the brake lines, so you don't have to go through the bleeding procedure for the master cylinder, and then you don't have to bleed your brakes afterwards. So we do agree that this is the way to do it. Keep the master cylinder lines all connected and just crank it out of the way and get that brake booster out. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean, and special guest Aaron. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods and sick FZJ80 Land Cruisers. Peace out and bye-bye.